Hi everyone, welcome to Football and Finance, episode 7 with Joseph and Nash. Back again for another 3 topics around the world of football and finance. But Nash, before we kind of dive in, how's the week?
Yeah, all good. Just work and family time, usual.
You didn't
Yourself?
manage to catch up on the last minute winner disallowed at Villa Park, or the North London derby, or or Burnley versus United. None of those games grab you.
Didn't watch the Chelsea game. I can't remember what I was doing, but I was out. Partly watched the Arsenal game and then missed the second half. So, yeah, I speak about football enough. Don't need to watch it.
It's given up. Like, can't make enough
Broken soul.
bad for yourself. But I guess, yeah, it was a lot of football over the weekend. North London derby obviously being the main highlight, and that kind of takes us into our first topic. Obviously, it was at Spurs' ground, amazing stadium, and that topic that's back around stadium renovations and development. Like, I know obviously we'd have seen some quality grounds across the leagues up and down the country, but there's now this topic about Newcastle needed to do stadium renovations. Everton are in the middle of one. Chelsea owners have ring fenced money in escrow to be able to do some type of stadium development. United are talking about it, given their facilities. What are your thoughts, I guess, first of all, when you're hearing about so many clubs looking at stadium renovations, when you kind of think about all the teams that already have done them, whether it's Arsenal, whether it's Liverpool, whether it's like Fulham about to finish one. What are your thoughts?
I think they're just like properties. They always need kind of renovation and some.
what property do you own?
They need renovation and upkeep, but then it comes to a certain point that you can't do anything to it. You can't revamp it anymore. That you just actually have to start again, and you need a new one.
Okay.
So that's what my point is that, and then a lot of these clubs, they built their stadiums many decades ago, and they're no longer kind of fit for purpose, even though you're trying to glitter a turd, as the saying goes. Like stadium revenue is a huge part of clubs' revenue as well. It can be anything from, like, I don't know. Well, for big clubs, it can be Premier League clubs. It can be anything from maybe a tenth to maybe generous to say a fifth. But it varies, and so there is a need to ensure that they are making these things profitable. I guess the fact is that they're now so expensive to build that it's like, are you actually going to get a return on it anytime soon if you're spending 2 billion? I think figures have been put out there for what Man United's new stadium might look like if you were to build a new one. But yeah, I think it isn't necessary. Everything moves on from time. The council estate I grew up in Church Road and Stonebridge in northwest London, they knocked it all down, started again and built new homes. Do you know what I mean? I just feel like it's a natural thing that just got new things don't always like align and are compatible with old systems as well. And when I talk about systems, I'm talking in the very broadest of sense. I'm talking about in terms of like how we function as a person using a particular thing, whether it's concerts, whether it's, I think Tottenham have got some track underneath, people want retractable pitches, all this kind of stuff. Like, that just doesn't, you can't do that on a pitch that is 80 years old, or a stadium that is 80, 50 years old. So what are your thoughts?
It was a hard one, right? Because I always sometimes struggle. I know, like, people have asked me, and you've asked me a couple of times, over, like, am I a football fan or a fan of football? And invariably the two sound the same, but they're nuances. And I guess the two things that kind of jumped out at me is the kind of the emotional side of it in terms of moving to a new stadium or renovating a stadium, and the kind of more pragmatic and logical. Because I guess the emotional side that you'll hear from most fans is the atmosphere these grounds generate, whether it's at the Anne Boleyn Stadium, the old White Hart Lane, or Highbury, etc., and how you can't replicate that heritage, that history, that culture, if by moving venue and that feel or the intimacy of some of these old grounds. But then the kind of logical and pragmatic perspective kind of says that fans, whether they're fair weather fans or season ticket loyalists or ultras, demand continuous progress and success, whether it's through the infrastructure club has, whether it's through the playing style. Like, look at West Ham trying to sack a manager that's got them their first European trophy, and has got multiple top 8, top 10 finishes. Like, they're always demanding more, and to kind of drive that demand is revenue. And your kind of only 3 big thematic or broad streams of revenue are that kind of commercial revenue, which, if we're being honest, that's relatively fixed and constant. We've talked about Nike, Adidas, examples of the type of amount you aim to get from those type of activities. Your match day income and broadcasting. Broadcasting television rights, as we know, is kind of to a certain degree plateauing. The new Premier League deal just adds an existing year onto the existing contract. So the actual value per year has kind of gone down, not materially, but has gone down. So the only other kind of avenue for clubs to kind of explore, if you haven't already explored it, and also it being driven by the dilapidation of your stadium, is that match day income. And biggest way to do it, renovate the stadium or move to a new place. So it is quite hard to kind of think about it, because what do fans prefer? Do you want better quality players, which needs to be paid for by new stadium, which via new season tickets, more hospitality, increased food and beverage, but invariably will lead to increased season ticket prices, like we talked about Nottingham Forest. So it's kind of like what fans want. And I think the challenge often with this discussion topic, like we've talked about ownership and stadiums and owners and the various type of owners, is maybe they don't bring the fans on this journey. And I know I'm kind of going back on what I've said in the previous episode, where I've been like, it's not your money. But I guess with the stadium, with things that are that kind of a bit more emotive, and you kind of need to win hearts and minds, even though it's not their money, this is probably one of the areas that you'll probably ever hear me say that owners or senior management within organizations probably do have to bring the supporters club, get them involved in the design and all that stuff.
I think that's a twofold. Maybe it's a kind of chicken and egg thing, because essentially the majority of the atmosphere in a stadium is from the fans. Like they're bringing the vibes, and you do need a good fan base in order to spur your team along. You've been at them grounds where it's like it's very hostile for the opposing team, obviously. In kind of our footballing culture, where it's predominantly fans are separated, and there's way more kind of tribalism around it. There's chanting, all that kind of thing. Yeah. So you need the fans to be on side and to enjoy it. But so the reason why I say it's chicken and egg, because if the football is trash and you're getting pumped, the fans are not going to be. The fans are not going to be. What are they going to cheer about? What are they going to make it hostile about? So they have a kind of a realization that in order for them to be motivated and passionate about something, the quality needs to be good on the pitch, right? And that obviously comes with investment and money and revenue, which we talked about loads in terms of player salaries and attracting top quality players. You need good money. I think that because I guess there's more than just the match day experience. Well, the match day experience is a completely different one as well. So there's fans that go to the game, but there's corporate boxes and seats, and that probably generate as much revenue as the season ticket holder, in terms of what's happening. And that isn't necessarily generating atmosphere. And maybe that's what fans are always keen on. I think people want to know that, like, I guess in some parts, like, how is the stadium being used outside of match day events, and whether it can generate revenue in that. And obviously we talked about concert things, but maybe there's a kind of a community element to it as well. Before, I think grounds used to be more, I guess, accessible to communities. Maybe now the big clubs, they will consult with their trusts and community schemes. Are they going to ask them, maybe they do ask them, do we want to build a new stadium? Is it easier to ask them, what do you want? Like, because if you want, or maybe what do you want from a stadium? Put it that way. That might be something that they get consulted on more, rather than, the finances behind it, and then bringing that into their views of how we build the stadium. Because ultimately, like you said, it's not your money. So that's where I see it going.
The thing, right, is, so if you take United, right, so obviously a minority shareholder, Jim Ratcliffe's come in, wants to renovate the stadium, the playing squad, the training ground, right? And you hear often United fans, those that are kind of fair weather ones, the ones that live in London but somehow are still United fans, as well as those that only United fans kind of pre-Fergie, talk about stadium requiring renovation. But I think there's got to be a healthy level of realism on the funding. So, for example, if you take the Arsenal, I found it really interesting. So, Arsenal Stadium, Emirates, it's about 450 million to build, I think is the number, and 260 of it was basically loans, debt, borrowing, bonds, and 190 of it was against future commercial revenue. And they still had to increase season tickets, and they still have the most expensive season ticket in Europe. They moved into that stadium in 2006. So 17 years on, and I know accountants, their books will say they've paid for their stadium, but 17 years on, they still have the most expensive season tickets. The stadium, they basically...
The stadium is now old.
I was just about to go. The stadium that was built is now old. And then I think the thing that kind of grabbed me, that I never actually known, that if you look at Arsenal Stadium, they actually got approval. The designs of the stadium were done in the 90s. And they got building permission at the end of the 1999, so just before the millennium. So now that stadium design, from inception to completion, that stadium was over 2 decades old in terms of the building plan and the specs and the CAD drawings. So now, like, even they will need to start looking in a couple of years how they not obviously move, because that's going to be awful, but how they change and augment the offering. And then if you look at the footballing side, and Arsenal, and this isn't like me trying to kind of bash Arsenal or their fans, but there's always an element of, like, be careful what you wish for, whether you're the owner or you're the fans. So 17 years before they moved to Emirates, they'd won 4 league titles. 17 years after moving to the Emirates, they've come second twice and they've won nothing. And again, yes, fine, FA Cups, woohoo, great, awesome. I'm sure the owners really care about the FA Cup. But in terms of major honours like Champions League, Europa League, Premier League, they've won nothing in 17 years. I'm not saying the stadium is the reason why they haven't won. Obviously, football moved on in those kind of 34-year period. But invariably, it doesn't always bring the success that people are wanting either side. So it might bring the financial success to the owners, but will come at the detriment towards the relationship to fans and fan groups, as well as the quality of football. And I think what's really quite compelling, if you're looking at it purely as a business venture, is the impact match day revenues can have. And like, this is like something that kind of blew my mind. So Arsenal's match day revenue is actually comparable to Bayern Munich's. And if you think about, I know they say the German league, it's Bayern Munich and the rest, but if you think about in the last 17 years, the success Bayern Munich have had, even if you were to discount their league titles and say, oh, the competition isn't there to push them, they've been to, what, I think 2 or 3 Champions League finals. They've definitely been to 2, because they lost to Chelsea in one of them and they won the other one. So they've been to 2 Champions League finals. They've won 1, lost 1, and they've got a boatload of league titles. So this is showing you comparatively what it can do. I think Arsenal's match day revenues are only like 40% smaller than Barcelona's, which is wild. Like when you actually think about it, the level of success Barcelona have had in that period. Arsenal have been in Champions League, 5, 7 times out of 17 years. Barcelona have been in it 17 times in a row, or whatever the number is. And they still have that narrowness in terms of match day revenue. So I guess the challenge is people look at the immediate gains to be had rather than what is the long-term vision. And one of the things that actually, when I think about Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and when you and I were working at the FA, there was a lot of benchmarking between Tottenham Hotspur and Wembley Stadium, because you have to. That's the newest, shiniest toy in town. It's probably the most state-of-the-art stadium this country has, if we're being honest, and chucking tribalism and football tribalism to the corner. That stadium is now competing with Wembley for major events beyond just football, whether it's big concerts, whether it's the NFL. They're kind of eating from their plate, so to speak. And the danger is that's now a blueprint for clubs also in major cities, whether you're Chelsea and you're saying, actually, we can build a 65,000 seat stadium in central London, zone 2, zone 3, really, where we're easily commutable to infrastructure and transport links, whether it's Heathrow or Gatwick, and we can host it in a way that it actually generates community impacts and residual positive externalities to other stakeholders. So there's that kind of argument. And I guess my worry now is, once everyone's done their stadiums, and this goes back to some of the topics we're going to go through about, like, clubs are just struggling financially. Once you've sweated the asset, you've done a Tottenham, you're throwing every event you can that possibly fit in the calendar: music, boxing, go-karting underneath, Formula One, all this stuff, and you've sweated that, and then you've sweated commercial revenues, because you can't put any more sponsorship on the kit, but it starts to look like a Formula One driver's kind of like overhauls as he's getting in the car. And then you sweated your broadcast and television rights, which, for all intents and purposes, people are saying we've hit that peak. Where'd you go? You build a new stadium? Do you feel Tottenham in 20 years? Do you sell that stadium, move out to Enfield, and build an 85,000 seat stadium? Or you triple season tickets because you're like, okay, damn, what do you do next?
You probably say that you don't look at revenue anymore, you look at costs. Like that's probably, if you're in a market that's saturated and there's no more, and you feasibly think there's no more revenue to be made, that is not going to kind of detract. So if you triple season tickets, like, people are not going to turn up anymore. Like, you're just going to price people up, maybe. So you look at costs, like, and we know what costs they're going to be looking at. And I don't know if we wanted to start there next with the kind of salary cap introduction that has been touted, but that's the biggest cost, and you lower your costs.
So you're going to go to Son, right? You're going to go to Son, Saka, and Palmer, and be like, guys, fantastic season, but so we're gonna have to do some cutbacks and reductions in salaries.
And what I think is that will happen is that those people will inevitably, like, top earners now will inevitably come down a bit as they kind of phase into the latter stages. And I when I say come down a bit, is like they will kind of reach, their peak in terms of earning potential, and then their next contract might still be a big one, particularly if they go to like Saudi or somewhere else. But the new contracts that come through, so the person who's gone through the academy, proved themselves, looking for that second or third deal, is not going to get what Son or Maddison might be on now. That's the way I see it, where it'll be kind of like a stage filter thing, where newer players will their salary expectations will not be the same. That is potentially how I see it potentially happening, because like that's the only way they're going to no real other costs associated with football. And well, there are costs associated with football, but in terms of backroom staff, in terms of administrative and executive staff, in terms of stadium upkeep and all those sorts of things, those things bear very little significance. And then we talked about my guy with the credit cards at Man United, but those things in actual reality are not going to reduce your cost significantly enough to make it a specific dent, unless you look at players' wages.
But I think this is so going into like players' wages, which is obviously like a really quite topical issue in regards to what's going on now around spending cap. I find it quite interesting because obviously like the whole point of the spending cap, which you've been kind of calling for months, weeks, years, whatever it may be, in terms of like anchoring, having some form of anchor financially anyway to what clubs are able to spend, using a multiplier of a club still in the Premier League, but less established in terms of their financial positioning to actually be able to draw that value. But I kind of find it interesting in terms of if you try and take it from the player side. I know UEFA are looking at creating a parallel type of legislation to ensure that there isn't some form of like regulatory obfuscation or avoidance. But I think the challenge is when you look at players' salaries, I kind of see it like any sport, right? There'll always be someone, your value is what someone's willing to pay. Mm-hmm. There'll always be someone willing to pay you the value that you believe that you're worth. The context about what league it is or your values or the morality of the people paying you, that's a separate discussion. But I think what will invariably happen is people will start to make more business decisions, or you risk going into I always use the NFL as a comparison, because if you look at football, if you look at sporting maturity on a curve, I feel there's elements where the NFL has kind of passed through some of these challenges and you're only just seeing football go through it. And like one of the things you see in the NFL, and you're an NBA guy as well, so I'm sure you might have a view, is all it will offer is the opportunity for players to anchor their new contracts to the new TV rights deal. Where they will say invariably, okay, there's Sky BT deals up for grabs in 2-3 years. I've got 3 years left on the contract. Don't want a renewal. I'm sticking with this contract, and I back myself to. If you're obviously you can't do it, and if you're just an average guy, but you back yourself that 2 to 3 years that deal gets done. They're not letting you walk at 24 on a free transfer, so they'll come up with the goods, and I think that in itself creates the kind of vicious cycle whereby you almost punish those at the bottom. And when I say at the bottom, I mean within a club hierarchy, an academy kid coming through who should be getting paid based on ability, and maybe $100,000 player, like just flat out. It's like maybe they're $100,000 player, and that's fair, nothing wrong with that. But you almost punish them because you need to find a way to keep those at the top well paid, which essentially happens in the NBA and the NFL, where the rookies earn like a minimum, because to keep the salary cap and the structure working, you need to be able to pay the Mahomeses and the Travis Kelce's. But everybody else kind of eats the lower salary, and the sentiment is your time will come to earn that money. But the difference is football careers are longer than NFL careers, so people may not want that time to earn the money. They might want to earn that money now, and someone will pay them.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just going to clarify one point, is that I think they will look at salary costs. I'm not saying that a salary cap is necessarily going to work, if that makes sense. Like in terms of reducing costs for football clubs, the salary cap idea, I think it's a little bit different from the NFL and NBA, because essentially they are coming from college, they're amateur athletes, if you want to say, not being paid on. I know they've got the NIL deals now, which they have.
Caleb Williams' apartment in LA, he's paid. They're not being paid for their work as such. For their services, and there's a finite market in which for them to go to. So if you're having salary cap
in the UK, but then you don't have it at Real Madrid and you don't have it at Barcelona, or you don't have it at. I know they have their own versions of financial fair play and profit and sustainability rules, but it may, again, what we've talked about before, is create a somewhat of a tiered system. It's difficult to argue that because essentially the Premier League has the most money and it probably will have more spending power than those leagues for the foreseeable future, put it that way. But when I think of a salary cap, I do think it then does it become sort of like, do you remember when Gary Neville had talked about nobody wants to, and Carragher talked about nobody wants to go up to play right back, and then we had like a plethora of amazing right wing backs, and does that then, do you end up in a situation where you can't pay your star player because he wasn't like a number 9 growing up, or he moves from, like Gareth Bale, he moves from left back to left wing back to left forward to up front, and because there's like an association with a position in terms of value, so then they don't get the bag that they're supposed to receive. Like a lot of this, I don't want to say it's moot, but I can see there being somewhat of a backlash from players' unions and any committees that have player representation, because who's going to vote for saying there needs to be a cap in terms of what I can potentially earn, even though in practically there's always a cap in what somebody can earn, because there's only an amount of money that somebody has in order to pay you, right? Like you can't be paid £100 million if your organization only has a revenue of 10 million and doesn't borrow. So I think
you touch on a good point though, that 100 million and spending 150 million. My worry with the spending cap and the anchor is, I believe some of these players will be paid in other formats, and I guess this is the issue, right? It's like
stocks and shares into United.
Joke about it, right? Last week was like a massive week in college football, the NCAA. Like Reggie Bush finally got his Heisman back because of the car and all the payments he took when he was at USC or to go there. People like look at Saracens, all the players. This is a rugby reference for those who don't know. We're like, who the hell is Saracens? Like,
that isn't a huge amount of, like, in terms of like revenue, pay that the footballers get, like with respect to Saracens players. It's like, it's the same way like how we don't really see what's the word, like betting scandals and fraud in, not betting scandals, but like fraud within high level football, because the players just earn too much. Like you giving me a free car means nothing. Like you giving me an apartment when I earn like that much.
I was using that as a comparison, as in like within the spending cap, clubs will find creative ways. Like look at the Chelsea example, right? They sold their hotel. They sold their hotel and their car park to another part of the umbrella group as a way of generating profit. Completely legitimate. They actually took it to the Premier League and said, this is what we're going to do. Premier League look at the rules and like, I'm not morally happy with this, but it is within the rules. So I almost feel like the question is, in the design of the spending cap, right, are they considering currently the Premier League, the ways in which it will be looked upon and the ways in which organizations will try and circumnavigate it? Because I think the answer to that question is probably no. And what kind of struck me when you were speaking about at the top of this conversation, that you're going to look at costs. Once you've maxed that revenue, cost is the biggest thing. I think there's an elephant in the room that we kind of never talk about. And I guess people talk about how much the Premier League, the TV broadcasting rights earn, and it's one of the most meritocratic and fair leagues. Like the difference between Man City and Luton is obviously based on positional finishes and a number of flagship games, but everybody earns about 100 million minimum, give or take, plus another 20 or 30. Whilst in La Liga, it's like Barca, Real, Atletico, rest of you
know. You guys are really scraps, Real Betis, chin up.
But I think the other angle is clubs will start to look at, within European competition and league competitions, of doing the deals, the TV rights deals themselves. Because if you look at the way UEFA currently pays clubs that are in their competitions, and the way the Premier League pays out the broadcasting rights, if I'm Manchester United, a bad example, not in the Champions League, if I'm Man City, my mindset as I'm sat around talking to senior leadership, my head of commercial is, okay, what are our figures? We've got semi-final of the Champions League, obviously not this year. In the past, we've done well in the league, etc. These are all the revenues we've managed to accrue from our TV broadcasting. You're looking at all the numbers of the other 19 teams, and to a certain degree, you're like, okay, Arsenal, fair, United, fair, Chelsea, fair, like Spurs, fair. You're going down and you're like, Sheffield United, Luton, Nottingham Forest. Like, why are they earning this money? And then you look at the Champions League, and then you look at how much all the clubs earn at the end when the tournament's complete. You understand the group stages and how they're all paid, etc. And then you look at UEFA's takings from the revenue share, and you're like, hold on, we are the product. What stops us doing this stuff ourselves? A la European Super League.
Super League.
And I kind of feel like when we're reaching a point where, like, it almost like if all of this stuff fails, before the players start taking cuts, the owners will take the reins and change the competition, or the Champions League UEFA, the Premier League will have it taken out of their hands. There's almost this, you're going to need to keep breaking up piece of the metaphorical bread, that slices that you are cutting these teams. That bread knife is moving further deeper into the loaf, into your share. And if you don't start increasing that bread slice, they'll learn how to bake bread, and then they'll cut whatever slice they want.
And I guess that's kind of one of my thoughts in terms of, we have a lot of I guess self-promotion nowadays through like social media, and like broadcasting generally isn't as one-dimensional as it once was, where, you know, remember back in the day everything was just on Sky, or back in the day you had 4 TV channels, or whatever it was, Channel 5 came and you were like, wow. So but now with the different forms of channels of social media that we're going to have, and we don't know what that looks like in the future, I think there'll be avenues in which those will be maximized, and maybe there's going to be somewhat of a power struggle from clubs to like now they all own their own YouTube channels. They have their own content around, this is us in the training ground, and, you know, people are clicking on that. They're getting revenue from advertisers that click on them. You can watch Chelsea under 18s, or all these types of stuff. But for the large part, I think that's, I don't see that being a monumental shift, like say in the kind of 5, 10, 15 years. So what I see is they're going to have to look at costs, and the players' wages are the biggest thing. And I think that with you know, saying like UEFA is going to need to give up some, like, I guess UEFA's argument will be that we are spreading this as part of the ecosystem, isn't it? We're giving this into women's football,
These top clubs don't care about you.
And I think that's the pushback they'll get from different entities. And you don't want to be, I think you don't want to be, I'm not saying this too greedy, but I think there also might become a backlash where certain newer audiences will turn away from you, more conscious audiences, maybe. I don't know if that's a real thing or not, because everyone just cares about money at the end of the day. But more conscious audiences, newer audiences will be like, oh, I'm going to prefer to watch or do something else rather than spend my time in football and watch football and consume football in the way that it currently is. So that's where I think that they have to have some sort of like conscience to some degree, or like have their finger on the pulse of what their consumers are going to be wanting in the future. And I don't necessarily think like a lot of their consumers are going to be like, especially the ones that maybe are not as tied to the club geographically, they might want a more social enterprise, like than what we currently is offered.
And I thought what was quite interesting as well, which has kind of gone under the radar, the reporting, like obviously at the point of filming this episode, like there's been obviously the decision has kind of gone through, of which I think Chelsea abstained, the two Manchester clubs, and I think one other, Villa voted it down. But apparently, in terms of this actually as a policy or some form of getting it adopted, the PFA, the Professional Football Association, will have quite a significant and integral say. So essentially, for those who aren't familiar with the Premier League, so the PFA are essentially the trade union for the players, and they'll need to kind of be listened to and their voices heard in terms of what changes they're looking at. I almost feel like the danger with some of this stuff, when you hear it on Sky, you hear it on TalkSport, you hear it on BBC, is the mechanics in terms of the implementation or the delivery is often understated. And sometimes the devil's in the detail. Hate the phrase, but it often does apply. And I think that the members of the public will never hear the full end-to-end details of how the actual spending cap is administered or implemented. But best believe the players aren't going to be signing up to something that's not in their best interest. And if it somehow gets through and it's not in their best interest, I think what you're going to start seeing is actually players signing up to shorter contracts. Because if you think about it, right, when we were growing up in the 90s, ACLs, like original Ronaldo, when he got the ACL, like ACL injuries and Achilles injuries were like career done. Like it was like, yeah, 2 more good years, those sympathy years because you were like a legend, and then you kind of just faded away into the sunset. Now, ACL injuries, you could tear 2 ACLs. Like look at the England centre back who plays for Aston Villa.
It's on the tip of my tongue.
Enzo Konsa. Used to play at Bournemouth. His name escapes me.
Yeah,
but ruptured ACL twice, gone on to have a successful Premier League career, played for England, etc. So these injuries are no longer career threatening, right? And I think you're going to push players into actually saying, okay, that first contract is 2-3 years for me. Like it's 3-4 years, and I have a release clause. Or players will start asking for release clauses to be inserted where they're like, actually, I'm protecting myself, where if I don't believe my value is being met and the club cannot accommodate me because the structure and the framework in place doesn't enable them to, I will take the law into my own hands by having that release clause to allow me to kind of exit. And I think that's the thing that may be going relatively understated. And I think what this kind of further demonstrates is where football is going in terms of people are protecting their interests, which kind of takes us into that final topic around owners or managers. Like, so now you're seeing managers to leave a club, 22 million, 9 million, 15 million to leave clubs.
And before we touch on that, I just wanted to mention, because you talked about Devon detail and the fact that a lot of this is presumed to be, but to enforce it will be a luxury tax. And I don't think we talked about that, which essentially means that if you go over the cap, you'll have to pay a fine. Now, some of our bigger clubs, you can already see it. They're like, this is going to be the price of doing business. So that's just one thing to look out for. I'm sure we'll revisit it in the next topic. But I think that was something that was worth mentioning, that the actual mechanism to enforce this, it looks like it's going to be a luxury tax, which in some ways is...
have you really lost if you're Man City and Chelsea?
Yeah. Because I pay over the odds for things anyway, because my name's Man City. And so when somebody when I want to buy something, it's like me going to the shop and be like, oh, this guy loves plantain. All right. I know he's going to 3 for £5. And I'm like, whoa. But I know you love plantain. So you're paying a premium already. They've seen you coming. So I feel like for Man City, Chelsea, the big clubs, they already know that you're a cash cow, even though loss making. But I think they're just going to bake that into the price of doing business if it's that model.
Where will the cost invariably land? at the door of the fans. This is the thing, right? It's always just pushed through. You take like supermarket costs of food, it just gets pushed through to the consumer. We complain, but then we continue to buy the product. And it's the same thing now you're seeing with managers. Like some of the numbers are staggering. Like I thought, like obviously everyone's talking about Arne Slot to the guy, the future Liverpool manager managing the Eredivisie, coming from Feyenoord, isn't it?
I think so. I can't remember.
I think it's Feyenoord.
I think it's 8-9 million though.
Yeah. It says like £7.7 million or like $9.6 million. And when I first heard that, I was like, that's mad. But obviously, revisionist history. I forgot Chelsea paid like 22 million for Graham Potter. The biggest, I thought, I was like, okay, I was like, damn, we got ripped off. Then I thought those were like exceptions. So I was like, okay, that's just Graham Potter. But there's so many examples. So like, I think Munich paid RB Leipzig like 17.5 million for Nagelsmann. Then they fired him after like a season. And then, so like, you've got all these examples of clubs now having to pay fees to release coaches that larger clubs want.
And execs. Execs too now.
Oh, yeah, and is it one of the Newcastle guys taking Dan Ashworth?
Ashworth, that's it.
No, and he was at the FA doing your days.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Execs. I wish somebody would pay me off to leave my job.
Like on a serious note, though, you're like actually starting to look at it. You're thinking, like, gone are the days that like Bayern Munich actually paid 17 million, or like Chelsea paid 22 million to get a coach from another team. And like, one, fair plays to those teams. You're protecting your asset because the coach's quality. You're letting a quality coach leave at the door, and invariably those clubs are probably fearful that they either not have repeated success, or if you're a RB Leipzig, you may not get in the Champions League again without Nagelsmann. If you're Graham Potter to Brighton, you may not finish as high, you may get relegated. So you're almost putting that's the insurance premium you're putting in place.
What are you going to do if your manager wants to leave? It's not like a player where a player wants to leave. We've seen it with, all the big stars that want to go to that Real Madrid or Barcelona, and they're like, oh, just stay another year, do a season, and some of them perform really well, some of them so whatever, but they don't have that impact on your locker room and dressing room, your playing, your ability to win games, and not just that, just your general culture around the club. Bang them off to the under 18s if they're sulking. Get out of the locker room, like change outside, all that kind of stuff. You can't do that with the manager. If your manager is sulking and doesn't want to be there, your club is finished. You're ruined. Like from a footballing side, you're not going to be in a good place. So you kind of have to have these release clauses in place, which then, as you say, provide you that insurance, and knowing that you'll probably have to spend that money again to get somebody else if you want someone quickly, or you can do the Pochettino thing.
There is one person debunking everything you just said right now. Xavi said he was leaving back in Jan. Now he's saying he's there till at least 25, maybe 26.
Exception to the rule. Yeah, just prove the rule.
We don't know what Barcelona have had to offer him, promises and concessions they've made for him to retain his services. But I think the thing that actually kind of struck me when I was looking at some of these numbers of managers and execs and release clauses is, one, you have to pay, like you're paying for the best. So Dan Ashworth is clearly deemed to be one of the better directors of footballs or senior executives in terms of player relations and player personnel. Hence why United are after him and Newcastle want a full year's pay. That's one bit. But two, it's that there's clearly a shortage of people at the top end in these roles, because I guess like what people are now looking at is like the Giovanni Trappattonis, the Capellos, all these. There's actually a shortage of like top level elite managers. Like whenever I hear people in WhatsApp groups saying, "Oh, Ten Hag should be sacked, Pop should be sacked," like all these guys should be sacked, and I'm like, and replace them with who? Like, there's a reason why literally half the Premier League is chasing Ruben Amorim. Like, Chelsea paid for the private jet, West Ham paid for the private jet. No one knows who paid for his private jet. Like, I mean, today I was like laughing when I was like looking at lunchtime. All these teams going there, they weren't the ones who paid for his private jet to send him to England. He clearly paid for himself. So either you all did a kind of joint venture and like contribute
for bottle service, yeah.
So I think this is the bigger thing, that like we're actually going to start to see some of these clauses rise. So the 7.5 million slot, which we're like, oh, that's quite steep, but it's actually cheap comparative to Nagelsmann and to Potter. With the amount of perceived quality at the top reducing, I wouldn't be surprised if there comes a point where we get the first 30 million buyout of a manager, regardless of how many years left on the contract, just by virtue of the fact that it's a demand and supply game. The demand for top-end managers massively outstrips the supply. As a result, there has to be some level of premium or insurance inserted by the clubs, and this is the mechanism through which they do it. Because like you said, if they want to go, you can't keep them.
Yeah. And there's a level of impatience, is there, as well, with clubs wanting immediate success. And so clubs and managers are going to be let go. And so that then means that you have to bring someone in and you're going to be paying a premium for it, because everybody knows that you need a manager. Your team is dead. You're going to have to pay these prices. What I think, what kind of not shocking to me is, I'm trying to apply this to my everyday life. Managers are not being paid the same as players. So most players' wages in the Premier League are, or there's a, the top end players are being paid more than their manager. Now, if you were a team of 5 or 6 in your commercial team, even in commercial teams, I think it's how it works, and you're the manager of that team, I don't think you would be outperforming financially in terms of pay packet what you receive home compared to your manager, because your team's performance and your manager's probably related to your team, and he's getting a cut of what you're making, and so on and so forth. So, but the difference in football, where managers earn a lot less, I think again probably relates to that talent piece in terms of the kind of premium talent who can actually score a goal, bicycle kick or something, and win your games. But I also think there's an element of, I guess, I do think there's with managers, while there isn't like a plethora coming out, I think there's almost like a changing of the guard. Like, you have the top couple of managers every so often, and then like 5 years time you'll have the next Fergie, Wenger, and Mourinho, and then next you'll have the Peps, Klopps, and do you know what I mean? There's kind of there is and people are willing to take risks with managers. I think more so than potentially, I think if you get a cheap player, they're like, well, fine, whatever, he's going to be cheap. But sometimes it's people are thinking, actually, I'm going to get this manager, and this could be what changes our whole entire football club, and I don't have to pay them that much.
The question I have for you, I know that, what are your thoughts? I'd really be curious to hear honest thoughts on this. I often hear when like top clubs are looking for managers. I know this isn't finance related, and it's like the human side, but there's a lot of links with invariably the finance in terms of them being sacked and then being paid out or being bought out of contracts. You hear about all these clubs say they run extensive processes, interview, procurement, like go through various situations, right? And then I'm like, so if we take POC, if we take Erik ten Hag, right? And it's the same, you talk about your daily life. All of us have some level of managerial style, leadership, coaching, an ability to influence and encourage people like that we've built up just from our own experiences with parents, adults, or whatever in our life. Like, I always look at that quote where like Shannon Sharp always says, people will tell you who they are, and you need to be honest in opening your eyes and seeing. So like, if you look at Ten Hag and POC, right? two managers that like quotes that their performance will be reviewed at the end of the season, which usually means it's a precursor. We're probably going to sack you, or we're trying to find our replacements. So when we sack you, it's an easy transition, right? Poch and Ten Hag over their years have showed you who they are, right? Like Eric Ten Hag, largely unproven, did a really good job with an Ajax team. Like he played a certain type of way. He had a certain level of dynamism in terms of the way the players played. He's used to work with a certain age group of players. Therefore, he's able to generate a certain output. Poch, Chelsea, prior to Chelsea, he was a PSG. Prior to PSG, he was a Spurs. We've got like years of footage, actual footage of these guys, their flaws, their deficiencies, their successes, right? Even Mourinho, chuck him in there. We've got years of but we hire them, we're surprised by the outcomes that we get, and then they're like, oh yeah, we need to get rid of them and replace them. So either the due diligence we're doing on the way in isn't robust enough, or the manager themselves during the interview has missold themselves, kind of like you or I going for an interview. Can you do SQL, Python, and
yeah.
yeah.
I just need a brush up.
Yeah. I wrote coding. I wrote the code for Facebook. Like, is it one of those where like they've embellished their ability to change through the interview process, which is now feeding through, or what is it? Because I always find it like, it always kind of blows my mind. It's like,
you know, I guess my overall views, and again, we may be steering away from strictly finance here, but assessments in order to fulfill a role have been demonstrated, and like performance of that role have consistently then been demonstrated to be inaccurate. Like interviews on a large basis are not a great precursor to how that person is going to perform the role. Some people interview well and are good in the job. Some people interview badly and they might have still been good in the job. Some people, will interview badly and be bad. But there's no, it's not I don't think like a lot of these pre-assessment things, do this presentation, do that presentation, like all these things can be manipulated, like you said, embellished, and you can put on a front as to, I have the ability to change, I have the ability to take on board advice, to lead, to value difference, to listen, all these kind of stuff. Like you can get case examples, and you can also use like snippets, isn't it? You said there's this record of like a holistic view that we could take, but what if you just take this one particular instance? So you could say, oh yeah, but this is how I treated Harry Kane, and this is the relationship I had with Harry Kane and Pochettino, and then they start thinking, oh yeah, Harry Kane. So when you're in an interview and you're like, oh yeah, but this is what I did when I was working at Coca-Cola, and they're like, oh, he was at Coca-Cola and he was doing this, this, and this. So you can make things into like narrowly focused, so you miss out the rest of it. Yeah. And then they get gassed up and they're like, oh yeah, this guy's going to be great. I can't wait to see him in training. I can't wait to see him like take over. And that's where I think a lot of this stems from. I think there's an inherent flaw in what we consider as what we think is going to be what we, interviews and what that means. And I know they go through like various stages. All the research that's out there says like people make up their mind within like minutes, if not seconds. Do you know what I mean? Of like what they think of your suitability to that role. And then the second thing is just your ability to manipulate that to your advantage. I think with the due diligence that probably is done, or the risks that are taken, is because, as I said, there's not many people that can do it. Not many people that even just getting to that stage of running, particularly like a big club in the top European leagues, is quite unproven. And so for large parts, people just think, oh, this person's done it before, so better the devil you know, almost in a lot of instances, particularly if you've gone for someone previously who was maybe a bit left field or an up-and-comer. You might go back to this person who we know had a great high and then crashed. But then we're like, and he had a great high and then crashed, but at least there's something there that you can kind of hang your hat on. That's my thoughts about it.
Because and to bring it back to kind of a finance kind of point, and like as we start to kind of wrap up, it's like, I guess my thing from a financial perspective is like, we use Pop, for example, like rumors on the street, they can't sack him, it's bad for the books financially, etc. 2-year contract, so they'll wait as late as possible before they actually have to pull the trigger, in hopes that his contract in year 2 is either much shorter or he just performs really badly in year 1 and they get rid of him. It kind of feels like there needs to be either stronger financial impacts of the inability to deliver against what you said, if you've been given all the tools. So obviously, if you've asked for 2 centre backs and a right back and a holding mid at world class level, and they've got you 2 guys from the Championship and 1 from the Jupiter League, etc., and then another from Serie B, that's not fair. But if you've been given the tools, there's got to be some form of an assessment to say, actually, we can claim back some recompense of your inability to deliver. But also, I think maybe there's a wider question of organizational fit is often going unrecognized. And then the last point for me is, you talked about the Arsene Wenger's, the Alex Ferguson, the Klopp versus the Arteta versus Pep. Maybe the answers, some of these roles are too large, and maybe the head coach and the manager role, because the titles are used interchangeably, actually these roles need to be, we don't have the personalities to carry some of these large roles anymore, which may just be the truth. And as a result, we need to divvy up these roles differently, and the salaries have to be calibrated to reflect that. Like, I don't know, because in rugby,
it's got to the director of football situation, though, isn't it? We never had directors of football. I think in the early 90s, and I think Italian clubs started doing it first. I can't remember where it started doing it first, and then kind of got brought into the English game, where actually people thought that there needed to be kind of an administrative person who looked after the football side but wasn't coaching the players. So that so you have a head coach who looks after first team operations in terms of, these are the players, you work with the ingredients. So you're the chef, but then you have director of football who's like the restaurant owner. Do you know what I mean? In certain ways. So that's where will that get divvied up even further? Yes. So now you have sous chef. So you have free tick. You have a set piece coach. You have all these type of things, and I think there'll be further and further delineation and specialization of roles because of just how big football clubs are, how much money is being spent. Just how they're just getting wider and wider and wider in terms of entities that encompass many different things. And that inevitably means that people are going to get more and more specialist. And usually that kind of means that there's less and less of them, like when you think of like barristers, I think there's 200,000 solicitors. There's like maybe 20,000 barristers. Of the 20,000 barristers, there's probably 2,000 who are King's Counsel. So you get that kind of fine, and then who earns the most money in the legal sector? King's Counsel barristers, KC. So that's how I see it.
I guess like on that note, we should look forward till like a club buys a manager out for 50 million. I guess the point is these numbers getting a bit, that the Potters and the Klopps and the Slots are coming thick and fast now. So it's just what happens when you get a 50 million manager. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. But hopefully it's not Chelsea getting that 50 million manager. We've already been burnt by the 22.
Yeah. Another thing that did make me think actually was like kind of the college football situation, but maybe that's a discussion for another time in terms of where you see like, managers making 30 million a year.
Yeah, 100 million over 4 years.
4 years, and then the star quarterbacks making no money apart from the NIL money. So anyways, it's been good chat.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
We'll pick it up again same time next week.
Yeah.
We'll set of topics, but till then,
Take care, guys.
I'll see you later.